Have you ever stopped to think about that question? Not 100 years ago, not 1,000, not even 10,000. 400,000 years. That number is so staggering that the human mind can barely wrap itself around it. According to mainstream science, our distant ancestors were just beginning to figure out basic stone tools back then. Fire was the greatest technological achievement of the age. The very concept of civilization was unimaginable. And yet, ancient texts, written thousands of years ago by Sumerian scribes on clay tablets, tell a completely different story. One that makes us question everything we think we know about our planet's past. We were taught that human civilization began around 6,000 years ago in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. We were taught that before that, humans were simply hunters and gatherers, wandering the wild plains in search of food. We were taught that writing, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, all of these achievements appeared relatively recently in the grand sweep of history, basically yesterday. But a series of remarkable discoveries made over recent decades, combined with a close reading of humanity's oldest texts, offers us a radically different picture. A picture so extraordinary that most mainstream academics prefer to simply ignore it. Today, we're going to dive into the world of ancient Sumerian records that describe events unfolding hundreds of thousands of years ago. We'll look at archaeological finds that don't fit the official timeline. We'll examine geological data that seems to confirm what once appeared to be myth, and we'll listen to the voices of ancient peoples who may have been trying to send us a warning across the abyss of time. Hey, welcome to the channel where we explore the dark corners of history and ask the questions others are afraid to ask. We don't take anything at face value here. We question, we dig, we search for truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Sit back, get comfortable, and open your mind, because what we're about to discuss today might completely change the way you think about humanity's past. And if you enjoy exploring the mysteries of our world, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next journey into the unknown. So let's start with what we've been told is the truth. The official version of history tells us that the first real civilizations emerged in the so-called Fertile Crescent around 6,000 years ago. Sumer, located in what is now Iraq, is considered the cradle of human culture. That's where people allegedly invented writing for the first time, built the first cities, constructed the first temples, and developed the first systems of government. It sounds logical, it sounds convincing, and it's what schools and universities around the world still teach. But here's what's fascinating. The Sumerians themselves never claimed to have invented any of it. On the contrary, their oldest texts make it clear that knowledge was given to them from the outside. Sumerian scribes recorded stories of gods who descended from the heavens and taught humanity everything it knew. They called these gods the Anunnaki, a term that literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. And according to these texts, the Anunnaki's arrival on earth didn't happen 6,000 years ago. It happened approximately 400,000 years ago. Imagine for a moment that this is true. Imagine that 400,000 years ago, intelligent beings with advanced technology arrived on our planet. They established settlements, mined precious minerals, and ultimately created human beings to serve as their labor force. Sounds like science fiction, right? But that is exactly what humanity's oldest written sources tell us. And before we dismiss these stories as primitive myths, let's take a much closer look at what they actually say. Sumerian texts were inscribed in cuneiform script on clay tablets, thousands of which have survived to this day. Among them is the famous Sumerian king list, a document recording all the rulers of Sumerian city-states along with the lengths of their reigns. Remarkably, the list begins with the words, "when kingship descended from heaven," and goes on to list kings who reigned for astonishing lengths of time, sometimes tens of thousands of years each. Modern historians typically dismiss these early entries as mythological exaggeration. But what if ancient scribes were simply recording what they knew from even older sources? One of the most comprehensive accounts of events from 400,000 years ago is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Although it was written down around the 16th century BC, scholars acknowledge it's based on far older Sumerian sources. It describes a cosmic battle among the gods, the formation of Earth and other planets, and the arrival of divine beings on our world. Reading it today, you can't help but notice striking parallels with what we know about the formation of our solar system. Even more detailed information appears in the texts known as the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. These works trace the history of humanity from its creation all the way to the Great Flood. And once again, the time frames referenced stretch hundreds of thousands of years into the past. According to the Atrahasis, the gods came to Earth to mine gold and other valuable metals. At first, they did this work themselves, but over time they grew exhausted and revolted. Leadership decided a new kind of being needed to be created, one that would do the work for them. That, according to these texts, is how humanity was born. The Sumerian account of human creation is nothing like what you'd read in later religious texts. There's no instantaneous divine act. Instead, it describes a long process of trial and error, the gods experimenting with various life forms before arriving at the result they wanted. The goddess Ninhursag, also known as Nintu, meaning Lady of Life, or Lady of the Rib, worked alongside the god Enki to create a being capable of understanding commands and carrying out complex work. The texts mention using the essence of an already existing primate on Earth, combined with divine blood, to create a new species. A modern reader can't help noticing the resemblance to genetic engineering. Enki and Ninhursag ran many failed experiments before succeeding. The texts describe creatures that couldn't hold their urine, creatures that couldn't eat bread, creatures with impaired vision and other defects. Each time, the gods went back to the drawing board. This reads nothing like a perfect divine creation. It reads like a scientific research process, full of failures and incremental improvements. When the first successful being was finally created, it was called Adamu. That name, of course, immediately calls to mind the biblical Adam. This is no coincidence. The Hebrew tradition behind Genesis draws heavily on older Mesopotamian sources, but in the Sumerian version, Adamu was not alone. A female counterpart was created as well. These first humans were sterile. They couldn't reproduce on their own. The gods manufactured new workers in their laboratories as needed. Then something significant happened. According to the texts, one of the gods, often identified as Enki, decided to give humans the ability to reproduce. This is described as a major turning point in human history. From that moment, humanity could grow its own population, which eventually led to explosive demographic growth. It also meant the gods lost total control over human numbers. Some researchers see in this storyline a parallel to the biblical account of the forbidden fruit and the expulsion from Eden. The knowledge given to humanity changed its destiny forever. Now let's think about the timeline. Sumerian texts claim the gods arrived on Earth approximately 440,000 years ago. Humanity was created considerably later, after the gods had worked the planet for 40 periods called shars. One shar equaled 3,600 Earth years. Simple multiplication gives us 144,000 years. So according to this chronology, humans were created roughly 300,000 years ago. And here's where things get genuinely mind-blowing. Modern genetics tells us that Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, appeared approximately 300,000 years ago. This isn't just a coincidence of numbers. For a long time, the scientific consensus held that modern humans emerged around 200,000 years ago in Africa. But recent discoveries, particularly at the site of Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, pushed that date back by 100,000 years, 300,000 years, exactly when, according to Sumerian texts, the first human was created. A skeptic will say, this is pure coincidence. Ancient people couldn't have known anything about genetics or evolution. They were just making up myths to explain their existence. But what if we look at this from a different angle? What if these stories weren't invented, but transmitted from generation to generation by people who actually knew what had happened? What if, over thousands of years of oral tradition, the details became distorted, but the essential framework survived? That idea may sound incredible, but it explains too many coincidences to simply be waved away. Consider the geography described in these ancient texts. The Sumerians identified the first settlements of the gods in a region they called Eden, a word meaning plain or steppe. This is the direct origin of the biblical word Eden. According to the texts, the gods initially founded 7 cities in this region, each serving a specific purpose. Eridu was the first city, founded by Enki. Bad Tibira was a center of metallurgy. Larak, Sipar, Shuruppak, each had its own specialty. Remarkably, archaeological excavations in Iraq have found the remains of the oldest known cities in the exact locations mentioned in the Sumerian texts. But Mesopotamia wasn't the only area where the gods operated. The texts also mention a region called Abzu, meaning deep mines, located in Africa, where gold mining was carried out. Enki managed operations in Abzu, while his brother Enlil controlled affairs in Mesopotamia. This division of authority between the two brothers became the source of many conflicts running through Sumerian mythology, conflicts that some researchers argue continue to influence human history to this day. This raises an obvious question. If all of this is true, if a developed civilization really existed on Earth 400,000 years ago, why don't we find its remains? Why aren't archaeologists digging up cities and technology from that era? This is a serious objection, and it deserves a serious answer. First, consider the destructive forces that have acted on Earth's surface over hundreds of thousands of years. Ice ages came and went. Global sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. Tectonic movements reshaped entire continents. Land that was dry ground 400,000 years ago may now lie at the bottom of the ocean or buried under miles of sediment. Archaeologists have barely begun to explore the ocean floor, and even there, structures are already turning up that don't fit the official narrative. Second, even modern materials aren't permanent. Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, plastic degrades. Over hundreds of thousands of years, most technological artifacts would leave no trace. The only things that can survive that long are worked stone and, under special conditions, certain metals. And even if such artifacts existed, would we recognize them as the work of intelligent beings? Or would we mistake them for unusual natural formations? Third, there's the question of where and what we're actually looking for. The overwhelming majority of archaeological research focuses on the last few thousand years of history. Excavations target sites where mainstream science expects to find ancient civilizations. But if human history is far longer and more complex than we've assumed, we may simply be looking in the wrong places for the wrong things. And yet, finds do exist that give pause. Around the world, archaeologists keep discovering objects and structures that don't fit the accepted timeline. These are often called OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts, metal objects found in coal seams millions of years old, worked stones and geological layers formed long before the appearance of modern humans, skeletons of anatomically modern people in deposits far older than official science allows. Many of these can be explained by dating errors, contaminated samples, or misinterpretation, but their sheer number and variety is hard to ignore. Two famous examples stand out. The Antikythera mechanism was recovered from the wreck of an ancient Greek ship that sank around 2,000 years ago. It's an extraordinarily complex system of bronze gears used to calculate the positions of celestial bodies. Scientists long struggled to accept its authenticity. Nothing remotely like it, according to the official record, appeared in Europe for another 1,500 years. The Antikythera mechanism proves that ancient people were capable of technological achievements we never suspected. If such a device could exist in ancient Greece, what else might have existed in an even more distant past? The Baghdad Battery is a ceramic vessel with an iron rod inside a copper cylinder, dated to roughly 2,000 years ago. Experiments have shown that when filled with an acid like vinegar, it produces electric current. What it was used for remains a mystery. Possibly electroplating metals, possibly medical applications, but its very existence shows that ancient people possessed knowledge we never credited them with. Returning to the Sumerian texts, according to them, the Anunnaki's primary mission on Earth was the extraction of gold. This seems strange at first glance. Why would an advanced civilization need so much gold that it was worth crossing interplanetary distances to get it? To modern people, gold means jewelry and wealth. But gold has a remarkable range of unique properties that make it indispensable to high technology. It doesn't oxidize or corrode. It's an outstanding conductor of electricity and heat. It can be rolled into sheets only a few atoms thick. It reflects infrared radiation. Today, gold is used in electronics, space technology, and medicine. But the Sumerian texts offer another explanation. According to them, the Anunnaki used gold dust to repair the atmosphere of their home planet. Microscopic particles dispersed in the upper atmosphere to reflect solar radiation and prevent heat loss. Interestingly, modern science actually discusses similar ideas in the context of geoengineering as a potential response to climate change here on Earth. According to Sumerian cosmology, the Anunnaki's home planet was called Nibiru. It's described as a large celestial body traveling on a highly elongated elliptical orbit around the Sun. One full orbit takes 3,600 Earth years, the same shar used as a unit of time throughout the Sumerian texts. For most of its orbit, Nibiru remains far beyond the visible solar system, in the cold outer depths of space. But every 3,600 years it swings close to the inner planets, becoming visible to the naked eye from Earth. The idea of an unknown large planet lurking in the outer solar system was long dismissed as pure speculation. But in recent years, astronomers have found indirect evidence that such an object might actually exist. Strange anomalies in the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects, small icy bodies at the edge of the solar system, suggest the gravitational pull of a massive, unseen body. Scientists call this hypothetical object Planet 9 or Planet X and are actively searching for it. If that planet is ever found, it would be a stunning confirmation of ancient Sumerian knowledge. Around the world, there are archaeological sites that simply don't fit the official story of history. Massive stone structures built with a precision that seems impossible for primitive cultures. Stonework of a quality that would challenge even modern tools. Transportation of multi-ton blocks over hundreds of miles, without the wheel or draft animals. Astronomical knowledge encoded in the orientation and proportions of ancient buildings. Take Baalbek in modern Lebanon. The ruins of an ancient temple complex sit atop a foundation of gigantic stone blocks. 3 of them, known as the Trilithon, weigh roughly 800 tons each. Nearby in a quarry lies an even more massive block, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons. Modern cranes can handle weights like that, but even for us, it represents a serious engineering challenge. How ancient builders moved these blocks and fitted them together with millimeter precision remains a genuine mystery. Official history attributes the temple complex at Baalbek to the Romans, who built a temple of Jupiter here around 2,000 years ago. But the Trilithon and other megalithic elements of the foundation are clearly older than the Roman structures, built in a completely different style with entirely different technology. Local legends connect these ancient stones to the era before the Great Flood and attribute their construction to giants or gods. Even more enigmatic is Pumapunku in Bolivia, part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological site. Massive blocks of andesite and diorite, among the hardest stones on Earth, are scattered among the ruins. These blocks are machined with incredible precision, perfectly right-angle corners, mirror-polished surfaces, complex geometric forms cut to fractions of a millimeter. Some feature intricate interlocking joints that fit together like puzzle pieces. The official dating of Tiwanaku places it in the 1st millennium AD, attributing it to the Tiwanaku culture. But that dating is based on organic materials found near the ruins, not on the stones themselves. Stone contains no organic material and cannot be carbon dated. Meanwhile, geological and astronomical analysis points to a far greater age. Arthur Poznansky, a Bolivian archaeologist who devoted much of his life to studying Tiwanaku, concluded it was at least 17,000 years old, based on the astronomical alignment of the Kalasasaya temple. 17,000 years is already startling, but some researchers go further. They note that the ruins of Pumapunku look as though they were destroyed by some catastrophic force, blocks scattered chaotically, some overturned, many shattered. This doesn't look like gradual weathering. It looks like the aftermath of a massive earthquake, or, as some suggest, a gigantic wave triggered by a sudden rise in sea levels at the end of the last ice age, or perhaps an even older catastrophe recorded in the myths of every people on Earth, the Great Flood, which brings us back to the Sumerian texts. The story of a catastrophic flood that destroyed nearly all of humanity is one of the central themes of Mesopotamian mythology. In the Sumerian version, the hero is Ziusudra. In the later Akkadian version, he is Utnapishtim, and in the biblical version, of course, Noah. But across all versions, the core elements remain the same. The gods decide to destroy humanity with a flood. A righteous man is warned and builds a vessel, saving his family and the animals. According to Sumerian texts, the flood came after a prolonged period of climate disruption and natural disasters, droughts, failed harvests, and ultimately famine so severe that people resorted to cannibalism to survive. The chief god Enlil decided humanity had become too loud and troublesome and decreed its destruction. But Enki, the creator of humanity, refused to let his creation perish. He found a way to warn the righteous king Ziusudra and gave him instructions for building the ark. The date of the flood, according to Sumerian chronology, can be estimated from the king list. The flood marks a sharp transition from kings with impossibly long reigns to kings who ruled for ordinary human lifespans. Following the chronology proposed by researcher Zechariah Sitchin, the flood occurred approximately 11,000 years ago. This aligns with the end of the last ice age, when global sea levels genuinely did rise dramatically as continental glaciers melted. It also aligns with the disappearance of the megafauna, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant ground sloths, and with the first appearance of agriculture and settled life in various parts of the world. Does this prove that Sumerian myths are based on real events? Not necessarily. Correlation isn't causation, but the coincidences keep piling up, and at some point there are simply too many of them to explain away as chance. Consider the Sumerians' astonishing knowledge of astronomy. They knew that Earth and the other planets orbit the Sun, thousands of years before Copernicus rediscovered the idea. They knew of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which are invisible to the naked eye and weren't officially discovered until the 19th and 20th centuries. They knew about the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter and had an explanation for its origin. Where could they have obtained this knowledge if not from a more advanced civilization? One Sumerian cylinder seal, known as VA243 and housed at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, depicts a star surrounded by 11 celestial bodies of varying sizes. If interpreted as a diagram of the solar system, we see the Sun at center, the 9 planets we know, and 2 additional objects. One may be the Moon shown beside Earth, while the other, according to some researchers, is Nibiru itself, the 12th planet of Sumerian cosmology. Skeptics point out that the central object doesn't resemble traditional Sumerian depictions of the Sun, which typically featured distinctive wavy rays. But defenders of the alternative interpretation counter that the seal is schematic, not a precise astronomical map, and that the mere fact of depicting a star surrounded by multiple celestial bodies is remarkable for a culture that, according to official science, believed in a flat Earth and a solid celestial vault. Even more impressive are Sumerian mathematical achievements. The Sumerians used a base 60 numbering system. From them, we inherited the division of the hour into 60 minutes, the minute into 60 seconds, and the circle into 360 degrees. 60 is a highly composite number, divisible by an unusually large number of integers without a remainder, making it extremely convenient for practical calculations. But why the Sumerians chose 60 as the basis of their mathematical system remains a puzzle. One of the most tantalizing artifacts linked to the theme of ancient knowledge is the Piri Reis map. Compiled by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis in 1513, it shows the western coastline of Africa, the eastern coastline of South America, and most remarkably, the northern coastline of Antarctica. Why remarkable? Because Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after the map was drawn. More astonishing still is how Antarctica is depicted, without its ice cover, showing rivers, mountains, and bays. Modern geological surveys have confirmed that the shape of Antarctica's coastline beneath the ice sheet actually matches what appears on the Piri Reis map. Piri Reis himself noted in annotations that he compiled the map from older sources, including charts dating to the time of Alexander the Great. That means even older maps must have existed somewhere, maps showing Antarctica without ice. But the last time Antarctica was ice-free was millions of years ago. Or was it? Some researchers suggest that parts of Antarctica may have been free of ice far more recently than officially believed, pointing to the theory of Earth crustal displacement, proposed by Charles Hapgood and supported by Albert Einstein himself. Under this theory, Earth's lithosphere can periodically shift relative to its rotational axis, meaning regions now in polar zones may once have been in more temperate latitudes. If such a shift occurred relatively recently, say 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, it would explain not just the existence of ice-free Antarctic maps, but also other mysteries, including the sudden freezing of Siberian mammoths with undigested grass still in their stomachs. The Piri Reis map is not alone. A whole series of medieval and Renaissance maps, the so-called portolands, demonstrate an uncanny accuracy and geographic knowledge that seemingly couldn't have existed at the time. The 1531 Orontius Phineas map shows Antarctica with mountain ranges and rivers. The 1737 Boache map shows Antarctica divided into two separate landmasses, something confirmed only in the 20th century through seismic surveys. The medieval cartographers themselves indicated they were copying from ancient sources. But which ancient civilization owned those original source maps? And how could it have possessed such precise global geographic knowledge? The only logical explanation is that in the distant past there existed a culture capable of circumnavigating the globe and mapping the entire planet, a culture destroyed by some catastrophe, whose knowledge partially survived and was passed down through the centuries until it reached medieval mapmakers. Let's turn to the scientific evidence. One of the most intriguing areas of research is genetics, which allows us to peer into the past and trace the history of our species across hundreds of thousands of years. The first thing that stands out when studying the human genome is its remarkable uniformity. All humans on Earth, regardless of race or geographic origin, are genetically nearly identical. The differences between the most distant human populations amount to less than 1% of the genome. By comparison, chimpanzees, our closest relatives, display several times greater genetic diversity within their species. This indicates that humanity at some point passed through a genetic bottleneck, a catastrophic population collapse to a very small number of breeding individuals. Geneticists estimate this occurred roughly 70,000 years ago, possibly reducing the human population to a few thousand, or even a few hundred, reproducing individuals. This event is usually linked to the eruption of the Toba supervolcano in Indonesia, which triggered a global volcanic winter. But some researchers point to the possibility of later catastrophes as well, including the flood described in ancient texts. More puzzling still is the question of modern human origins. According to the official theory, Homo sapiens evolved gradually from more primitive ancestors over millions of years. But the genetic data paints a more complex picture. Modern humans turn out to be not the product of linear evolution, but a hybrid of several hominin species. Traces of interbreeding with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly other unidentified hominins have been found in our DNA. Even more intriguing is the presence in the human genome of sequences that have no equivalent in any other primate. Among these is a chromosomal fusion that left humans with 46 chromosomes rather than the 48 found in all other great apes. A chromosomal fusion of this kind, while theoretically possible through natural mutation, is an extraordinarily rare event. Rarer still is the fact that it not only occurred but spread throughout the entire human population. This means either that all modern humans descend from one or a few individuals in whom this fusion took place, or that the fusion was somehow deliberately introduced into the human lineage. That last idea contradicts the principles of natural selection, of course, but it aligns remarkably well with the Sumerian descriptions of human creation through genetic intervention. There are other genetic mysteries as well. The genes responsible for human brain development show signs of positive selection, meaning they evolved far faster than ordinary evolutionary rates would predict. This is especially true of genes linked to language and abstract thought. It creates the impression that the development of the human brain was somehow accelerated or directed. And then there is the mitochondrial Eve, the woman from whom all modern humans inherited their mitochondrial DNA. Analysis shows she lived approximately 200,000 years ago in Africa. Similarly, all men on Earth descend from a common patrilineal ancestor, the so-called Y chromosomal Adam, who also lived in Africa, though possibly at a slightly different time. Official science explains these findings through natural evolutionary and demographic processes. But alternative researchers see in them a confirmation of ancient creation myths. Could mitochondrial Eve be that first woman created by the gods in their laboratories? Could the genetic data point to the artificial origin of our species? The geological and climate record also offers striking data. Earth's rocks preserve a chronicle of climate change spanning millions of years. By studying ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, deep-sea sediments, and ancient tree rings, scientists can reconstruct climate history with extraordinary precision. The data confirms that Earth's climate in the past was nothing like today's. Over the past several million years, the planet has cycled through ice ages and interglacial periods. During ice ages, massive glaciers covered the northern continents, sea levels dropped up to 400 feet below current levels, and lands now underwater were dry. During interglacials, including the one we're living in now, the climate was warmer and coastlines approached modern configurations. The last glacial maximum occurred around 20,000 years ago. What followed was a warming that happened not smoothly, but in fits and starts, with periods of abrupt climate change. One such period was the Younger Dryas, approximately 12,800 years ago, when global temperatures suddenly plunged nearly back to glacial levels before rapidly rebounding. The cause of this event is still debated, but some scientists link it to a comet or asteroid impact. It is precisely on this period that much geological evidence of global catastrophe converges. Layers of ash and soot indicating massive wildfires, sudden shifts in vegetation, the mass extinction of megafauna, and possibly evidence of gigantic floods that could have served as the real-world basis for the myths of the Great Flood. In North America, geologists have found traces of catastrophic flooding known as the Missoula floods, when the enormous glacial Lake Missoula broke through the ice dam holding it back. Colossal volumes of water surged toward the ocean, sweeping everything in their path. These floods occurred dozens of times over thousands of years, carving the distinctive landscape still visible today in Washington state. Each flood involved roughly 1,000 cubic kilometers of water moving at 60 miles per hour. If comparable catastrophes were happening in North America, they were certainly happening elsewhere in the world too, and memories of those floods could have been preserved in oral tradition and eventually recorded by Sumerian scribes. This explanation requires no gods, no aliens. It's based on entirely natural processes, but it also confirms that ancient myths can contain a kernel of genuine historical truth. Ancient Egyptian texts also contain references to gods who ruled Egypt in the remote past. According to the records of the historian Manetho, who lived in the 3rd century BC, Egyptian history does not begin with the pharaohs. It begins with Go-Diaz, who ruled the land for many thousands of years. Gods were followed by demigods, then spirits of the dead, and only then did human rulers take over. Manetho calculated the total duration of divine rule at more than 30,000 years. Modern Egyptologists routinely dismiss this data as mythological exaggeration, but recent geological research on the Sphinx at Giza casts serious doubt on the official timeline. Geologist Robert Schoch drew attention to characteristic erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body. These patterns, he argues, were caused not by wind and sand as previously assumed, but by water, specifically prolonged rainfall. But Egypt hasn't seen heavy rainfall in thousands of years, not since the region's climate became arid. This means the Sphinx must have been carved far earlier than the official date, possibly 7,000 to 12,000 years ago, when Egypt still received significant rainfall. If the Sphinx is truly that old, it completely rewrites our picture of ancient history. It means that long before the official start of Egyptian civilization, a sophisticated culture already existed here, one capable of carving colossal figures from bedrock, a culture destroyed by catastrophe and remembered by later Egyptians only in the form of myths about the reign of the gods. Adding to the mystery, the 3 pyramids of Giza are arranged on the ground to precisely mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. But due to the precession of Earth's axis, the position of constellations relative to the horizon shifts slowly over millennia. Calculations show that the best match between the pyramid layout and Orion's belt occurred around 10,500 years ago, the same period suggested by Schoch's geological analysis of the Sphinx, and the same period that marks the end of the last ice age and the proposed date of the Great Flood. Similar astronomical alignments have been found at ancient monuments worldwide. Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirrors the constellation Draco. Teotihuacan in Mexico reproduces the layout of the planets. Stonehenge in England functions as a precise astronomical calculator for predicting solar and lunar eclipses. All of these structures attest to their creators possessing deep knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, knowledge that, according to official history, simply should not have existed at the time these monuments were built. Plato called that lost civilization Atlantis. In his dialogues, written around 2,400 years ago, he described Atlantis as a powerful island empire somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlanteans possessed advanced technology and great wisdom, but grew arrogant and aggressive. The gods decided to punish them, and in a single day and night, Atlantis sank beneath the waves. Plato dates this event to approximately 9,000 years before his own time, roughly 11,400 years ago by our calendar. Researchers have proposed countless locations for Atlantis, from the Mediterranean to Antarctica, and none has gained universal acceptance. But the underlying idea, an advanced civilization destroyed by catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age, finds increasing support. Perhaps Atlantis isn't a specific place at all, but a collective name for the entire pre-flood culture that existed across territories now submerged beneath the world's oceans. Let's step back and try to assemble the pieces. We started with a simple question. What was on Earth 400,000 years ago? Mainstream science has a straightforward answer. Primitive hominids were just learning to use basic stone tools. No civilization, no cities, no writing, no technology, just the slow, endless march of evolution from ape to human. But the ancient texts tell a completely different story. According to Sumerian sources, 400,000 years ago, intelligent beings arrived from another world. They established settlements, mined precious materials, primarily gold, and ultimately created human beings as their workforce. This account may sound fantastical, but as we've seen, it aligns remarkably well with a wide range of modern scientific findings. Genetics tells us that modern humans appeared roughly 300,000 years ago, matching the Sumerian chronology of human creation. Genetics also reveals unusual features of the human genome, like chromosomal fusion and accelerated brain evolution, that are difficult to explain through ordinary evolutionary processes. Geology and climatology confirm that around 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, a global catastrophe occurred that could have given rise to the worldwide flood myths. Archaeology keeps uncovering traces of advanced technology and astronomical knowledge in cultures that, by the official timeline, shouldn't have possessed them. Take those three categories of evidence together: stone, earth, and human memory, and a picture begins to emerge that looks radically different from what we learned in school. A picture in which human history is far longer and more complex than we assumed. A picture in which we may not be the first advanced civilization on this planet, and a picture in which our origins may be connected to forces we haven't yet fully come to terms with. Let's imagine for a moment that the Sumerian texts contain real historical information, even if filtered through thousands of years of oral tradition and mythological interpretation. What would the story of the last 500,000 years on Irhoud look like? Roughly 440,000 years ago, representatives of a highly advanced civilization arrive on our planet. They establish several bases, primarily in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, and in Africa, where they mine gold. Two brothers, Enlil and Enki, lead operations. Their rivalry will become the source of conflicts that shape the course of human history. After tens of thousands of years of toil, the workers revolt. They've had enough. Leadership faces a crisis. Enki, the god of wisdom and creativity, proposes a solution: create a new kind of worker, intelligent enough to understand commands and perform complex tasks, but not developed enough to compete with the gods as equals. The raw material, local primates, already present on Earth, enhanced through genetic technology by splicing in elements of the divine genome. The experiments are many and the failures numerous, but eventually the first successful being is created. It's called Adamu. More follow. Initially sterile and entirely dependent on their creators, these new beings are eventually given the ability to reproduce. Their population grows rapidly. Centuries pass. The humans multiply, spread across the land, develop skills and culture of their own. The gods watch with growing unease. Some, Enki above all, are genuinely fond of their creation and want to see it flourish. Others, especially Enlil, regard humans with suspicion and hostility, seeing their growing numbers and autonomy as a threat to divine order. When a coming catastrophe becomes known, a flood that will scour the earth, Enlil decides to let it happen without warning the humans. Let them perish. It will solve the problem of overpopulation. But Enki cannot allow the destruction of his creation. He finds a way to warn the righteous king Ziusudra and gives him instructions for building an ark. The flood comes. Countless lives are lost. Cities and settlements are erased. When the waters recede, the world is unrecognizable. Coastlines have shifted. Whole territories have gone under. Survivors must begin again from nearly nothing. But the gods do not abandon humanity. After the flood, they restore contact with the survivors and help rebuild civilization. The Sumerian culture we know from historical records is the direct continuation of that post-flood reconstruction, carried out under divine guidance. Over time, the gods begin to withdraw. Perhaps their mission on earth is complete. Perhaps they decide humanity has developed enough to find its own way. Direct divine rule gradually gives way to demigods, then priest-kings, then ordinary human rulers. The age of the gods fades into legend, then into myth. But the memory survives, carried in oral tradition, inscribed on clay tablets and papyrus carved into temple walls. Each culture interprets that memory in its own way, adds its own details, distorts, and embellishes. But the core of the story remains constant. Gods descended from the heavens, taught humanity everything it knows, and then departed, leaving their creations behind. That's the story the ancient texts tell. Whether to accept it literally or treat it as a beautiful legend is a choice each person has to make for themselves. But regardless of your position on it, it forces us to confront some fundamental questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Are we alone in the universe? And what awaits us ahead? Modern science has its answers. We are Homo sapiens, the product of millions of years of evolution. We descended from ape-like ancestors in Africa and gradually developed into what we are today. Our civilization arose a few thousand years ago and has been advancing ever since. We haven't yet found evidence of extraterrestrial life, but statistically, it almost certainly exists somewhere in the infinite cosmos. These answers are based on observation, experimentation, and logical inference. They represent the best understanding of reality we've achieved so far. But they are not the final word. The history of science shows that our understanding of the world changes constantly as new data accumulates. What was impossible yesterday becomes accepted wisdom today and may be overturned tomorrow. Maybe in the future we'll discover evidence that the ancient texts contained more truth than we ever imagined. Maybe archaeologists will find artifacts that simply cannot be explained within the official chronology. Maybe geneticists will uncover even more compelling evidence of deliberate intervention in human evolution. Maybe astronomers will finally locate that mysterious planet on the edge of our solar system. Or maybe we'll never know the truth, and the mystery of our origins will remain forever unsolved. Either way, the search continues, And that, perhaps, is what matters most. Never taking anything on faith, constantly asking questions, seeking new data, remaining willing to revise your views in light of new discoveries. It is precisely this capacity for critical thinking and self-correction that distinguishes science from dogma and makes the advancement of knowledge possible. When we look up at the stars on a clear night, we see the same light our distant ancestors saw tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago, the same constellations they mapped and built their myths around. They looked up at the sky and asked the same questions we ask today. Where did we come from? Is there anyone out there in all that darkness? And why are we here? Maybe the answers are encoded in ancient texts we're only beginning to truly understand. Maybe they're hidden in genes we're only just learning to read. Maybe they're waiting for us at the bottom of oceans or beneath the sands of deserts in places we haven't yet explored. Or maybe the truth is so strange and wondrous that we won't recognize it even when it's staring us in the face. The Sumerian texts tell us the gods departed, but promised to return. They speak of a time when Nibiru will draw near the earth again, bringing with it changes both enormous and irreversible. Whether this is a literal prophecy or a metaphor for the cyclical nature of history is hard to say. But the idea itself, that our destiny is bound to cosmic cycles that transcend our understanding, gives us reason to think carefully about our place in the universe. We live in an age when old certainties are crumbling and new ones haven't yet taken shape. We know more about the cosmos than any generation before us, and yet we feel more acutely than ever the limits of what we know. Every new discovery spawns 10 new questions. The deeper we go into the mysteries of matter and space, the more mysterious everything becomes. And perhaps that's precisely why ancient texts hold such power over us. They offer a complete, coherent picture of the world, one in which everything makes sense and everything is connected to everything else. They tell us we are not an accident of evolution, but the result of a deliberate design, that our history has a purpose and a direction, that behind the chaos of events there is an order, and behind the suffering, a hope. Believe them or not, you can't deny their depth and their beauty. Thousands of years ago, people sat around fires and told each other stories of gods and heroes, of the world's beginning and its end. Those stories passed from mouth to mouth, parent to child, teacher to student. They changed and transformed, but they never fully disappeared, because there is something in them that resonates deep within us, something we recognize even if we can't explain it. Maybe it's genetic memory, inherited from those who once saw the gods with their own eyes. Maybe it's the archetypes of a collective unconscious common to all humanity. Maybe it's simply the imagination filling in the gaps in our knowledge with beautiful stories. But whatever the reason, we keep searching, keep asking questions, keep striving to understand. And in that striving, we are one with every generation that came before us and everyone that will come after. The chain of knowledge does not break. It stretches from the depths of the ages into an unknown future. We are only one link in that chain, but every link matters. Every question we ask, every hypothesis we test, every discovery we make, all of it adds something to the sum of human knowledge. If the ancient texts are right, and we truly were created by the gods, perhaps this is our real purpose, not to labor in mines as was originally planned, but to become seekers of truth, explorers of the universe, heirs to the work of our creators, to surpass those who made us and to become, in our own right, gods unto ourselves. That is a bold dream, but isn't that the very essence of the human spirit? And with that thought, we close today's journey. We started by asking what was on Earth 400,000 years ago. We examined different versions of the answer, the official scientific one, and the alternative rooted in ancient texts. We didn't arrive at a final conclusion, and that's okay. Some questions don't have simple answers, but the process of searching enriches us, broadens our horizons, and pushes us to think and to doubt. If you enjoyed this journey through the depths of time, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. We'll keep exploring the mysteries of the past and present in our upcoming videos. Until then, good night, sweet dreams. May your sleep be filled with visions of ancient cities and distant stars, of wise gods and brave heroes, and may you wake up tomorrow morning seeing the world through slightly different eyes, through the eyes of someone who knows that reality is stranger than it seems, and that the most astonishing discoveries may still lie ahead, because in the end, the story of humanity isn't something that happened long ago and finished. It's a living process, and we are all part of it. Every day we write new pages in that story, and it's up to us what those pages will say. Will they be filled with fear and ignorance, or with wisdom and love? Will we repeat the mistakes of the past, or learn from them? Will we prove ourselves worthy heirs to those who came before us, whoever they were? Time will tell. Thank you for being with me on this journey. Until next time, good night.